How did a single funny selfie turn my whole world upside down? What made my husband respond to a harmless joke with cold, official divorce papers? This is how one photo destroyed everything, and why I still think I did nothing wrong. My name is Emily Finch, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a marketing manager for a tech startup in downtown Seattle, and I thought I had everything figured out. I had a successful career, a beautiful 8-year-old daughter named Sophie, and a husband who provided stability. Sure, Adrian wasn't the most exciting man in the world, but he was reliable. At least, that's what I told myself. The whole mess started 3 months ago when I was in Paris for a marketing conference. I'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks, a chance to get away from the mundane routine of suburban life, to feel alive again. Adrian had been particularly distant lately, buried in his software engineering projects, barely looking up when I spoke to him. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics about Sophie's schedule and household maintenance. I was sitting in this charming little cafe near the Louvre, feeling sophisticated and worldly, when who should walk in but Mathieu Lefebvre. Mathieu, my ex from university, the one who got away. He looked exactly the same as he did 15 years ago, maybe even better. That same easy smile, those dark eyes that always made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. "Emily? Mon Dieu, is that really you?" His French accent still made my knees weak. We spent the afternoon catching up, and it felt like no time had passed at all. Mathieu was still single, still charming, still living his bohemian life in Paris. He listened to me, really listened, in a way Adrian hadn't in years. When I complained about feeling invisible in my marriage, Mathieu's eyes filled with genuine concern. "You deserve to be cherished, Emily. Life is too short to be unhappy." As the afternoon wine flowed, I felt myself relaxing for the first time in months. When Mathieu suggested we take a selfie for old time's sake, it seemed perfectly innocent. He pulled me close, his arm around my waist, and I felt that familiar flutter in my stomach. The photo captured us both laughing, looking comfortable and intimate. "Send it to your husband," Mathieu suggested with a mischievous grin. "Show him what he's missing." I should have known better, but the wine and the attention had clouded my judgment. I posted the photo on Instagram with the caption, "Reunited with an old friend in the city of love." Some people never change Narksha Paris magic, Darksha old friends, Darksha living my best life. Then, feeling bold and slightly vindictive, I sent it directly to Adrian via WhatsApp with the message, "Look who I ran into. Remember when you used to be this much fun?" His response came 3 hours later. "Got it." That was it. 2 words, no questions, no jokes, no reaction at all. I felt deflated and somehow more isolated than before. Here I was, having the most exciting day I'd had in years, and my husband couldn't even be bothered to engage. When I returned home 2 days later, Adrian was different. Not angry. That would have been easier to handle. He was simply absent. Polite but distant, like a roommate rather than a husband. He helped Sophie with her homework, made dinner, went through all the motions of family life, but there was a wall between us that I couldn't breach. "How was your trip?" he asked over dinner, his tone perfectly neutral. "It was great, really productive. The conference sessions were excellent, and I made some good networking connections." "That's good." He didn't ask about the photo. He didn't ask about Mathieu. He just nodded and turned his attention back to Sophie. That night, he didn't come home until well after midnight. When I asked where he'd been, he simply said he'd been working late and needed to finish a project. But something in his eyes had changed. The warmth that had always been there, even during our rough patches, was gone. I called my best friend Lily Harper the next morning, desperate to talk to someone who would understand. "He's being ridiculous," Lily said immediately. "It was just a photo with an old friend. You weren't doing anything wrong." "Exactly. I mean, we're allowed to have friends, right? Just because I'm married doesn't mean I have to pretend my past doesn't exist." Adrian's always been a bit controlling, Lily continued. Remember how weird he got when you joined that book club with all those divorced women? He probably sees this as some kind of threat to his perfect little suburban fantasy. Her words felt like validation. Maybe I wasn't the problem here. Maybe Adrian was just too insecure to handle his wife having a life outside their marriage. But as the days passed, his coldness only intensified. He moved through our house like a ghost, fulfilling his obligations but offering nothing more. Sophie began asking why Daddy seemed so sad, and I found myself making excuses for his behavior. Daddy's just tired from work, sweetheart. You know how hard he works to take care of us. The truth was, I was starting to feel angry. Here I was, trying to maintain some spark in my life, trying to be more than just a wife and mother, and instead of supporting me, Adrian was punishing me with his silence. It felt manipulative and unfair. 2 weeks after Paris, I found him in his home office late one night, staring at his computer screen. When I approached, he quickly minimized whatever he'd been looking at. "What are you working on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just some research," he replied without looking at me. "Research for work?" "Something like that." The evasiveness was unlike him. Adrian had always been straightforward, almost to a fault. This secretive behavior was new, and it made me nervous. That night, he slept in the guest room for the first time in our 10-year marriage. The next morning, I confronted Adrian over coffee, while Sophie was getting ready for school. "We need to talk about whatever's going on with you," I said, keeping my voice low so Sophie wouldn't hear. Adrian looked up from his newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which he'd started reading again recently. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. This cold shoulder treatment, sleeping in the guest room, acting like I've committed some terrible crime." "I'm not giving you the cold shoulder, Emily. I'm just processing some things." "Processing what? The fact that I had coffee with an old friend? The fact that I'm still capable of having fun without you?" He folded the newspaper carefully and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Is that what you call it? Having coffee?" There was something in his tone that made my stomach clench. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I'm sure it was just coffee." The way he said it made me feel defensive and guilty, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Well, not really wrong. Mathieu and I had spent more than just that afternoon together. We'd had dinner the next night, and maybe I'd let him walk me back to my hotel, and maybe we'd kissed goodnight. But it was innocent, nostalgic. It didn't mean anything. "You're being paranoid," I said, forcing a laugh. "It was just a photo, Adrian. With an old friend. I'm sorry if that threatens your masculinity or whatever, but I'm not going to apologize for having a life." Sophie bounced into the kitchen then, backpack slung over her shoulder. "Ready for school, Mummy?" Adrian stood up and grabbed his keys. "I'll drop her off today." "But I said I'll do it." His tone was final. After they left, I sat alone in our kitchen, feeling frustrated and misunderstood. I called Lily again. "He's gaslighting you," she said immediately, "making you feel guilty for something completely innocent. This is classic controlling behavior, Emily. You need to stand your ground." "I just don't understand why he's making such a big deal out of this." "Because men like Adrian need to feel like they own their wives. The idea that you could be attractive to other men, that you have an identity outside of being his wife and Sophie's mother, it terrifies him." Her words resonated with something I'd been feeling for months. Adrian had become complacent in our marriage, taking me for granted while I did most of the emotional labor of keeping our family together. When was the last time he'd complimented me? When was the last time he'd planned a romantic evening, or even seemed excited to see me? At work that day, I found myself venting to my colleague Jessica about the situation. "Wait, you were in Paris and ran into your ex?" Jessica's eyes lit up with interest. "That's so romantic. What did your husband say?" "That's just it. He's barely said anything. He's just being weird and distant." "Honestly? He's probably intimidated. I mean, you're gorgeous, you're successful, you're interesting. Maybe this was a wake-up call for him that other men find you attractive. I felt a warm glow at her words. It had been so long since anyone had called me gorgeous. But by lunchtime, the office gossip mill had somehow gotten hold of the story, and it had morphed into something much more dramatic. I overheard two women from accounting whispering about how I'd run off to Paris with my ex-boyfriend, and how my husband was probably planning to leave me. The distortion annoyed me, but I also felt a strange thrill at being the center of attention. For so long, I'd felt invisible, the suburban mom who'd lost herself in domesticity. Now people were talking about me, speculating about my life, seeing me as someone interesting enough to gossip about. When I got home that evening, Adrian was already there, helping Sophie with her math homework at the kitchen table. The scene was so normal, so domestic, that for a moment I felt a pang of guilt about the whole situation. "How was school, baby?" I asked Sophie, kissing the top of her head. "Good. Daddy helped me with my fractions. He's really good at math." I looked at Adrian, hoping for some sign of warmth, but he kept his eyes on Sophie's homework. "That's great, sweetheart. Why don't you go wash up for dinner?" After Sophie left the room, I tried again. "Adrian, can we please talk about this like adults? I feel like you're punishing me for something I didn't even do." He finally looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of cold assessment. "What exactly didn't you do, Emily?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're very focused on what you didn't do. I'm curious what that is." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I didn't do anything wrong. I ran into an old friend, we caught up, we took a photo. That's it." "That's it?" "Yes, that's it." He nodded slowly, then went back to cleaning up Sophie's homework materials. "Okay." That night, he slept in the guest room again, and the night after that. By the end of the week, it was clear this wasn't temporary. I found myself checking his phone records online, something I'd never done before in our marriage. What I saw made my blood run cold. He'd been making calls to a number I didn't recognize, and when I reverse searched it, it came back to a law firm. When I confronted him about it, he was maddeningly calm. "I'm just exploring my options, Emily." "Your options for what?" "For protecting myself and Sophie." "Protecting yourself from what? I haven't done anything." But even as I said it, I could hear how shrill I sounded, how defensive. That weekend, we were supposed to have dinner at my parents' house, a long-standing tradition that happened twice a month. I was dreading it, knowing that my mother would immediately sense the tension between Adrian and me and start asking questions. Sure enough, within 10 minutes of arriving, Mum pulled me aside. "What's wrong with Adrian? He looks like someone died." "He's just going through a rough patch at work," I lied. "Well, he's being rude. He barely said hello to your father, and he's just sitting there like a lump. You need to talk to him." During dinner, the tension was palpable. Dad tried to engage Adrian in conversation about sports, but Adrian's responses were monosyllabic. Sophie, sensitive to the mood, was unusually quiet. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Okay, everyone," I said, setting down my fork with more force than necessary. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room." Adrian looked at me sharply, but I was past caring. "Adrian has been giving me the silent treatment for 2 weeks because I had coffee with an old friend in Paris. Apparently, I'm not allowed to have male friends or post photos on social media without his permission." The table went silent. My mother looked shocked, my father uncomfortable. Sophie's eyes were wide with confusion. "Emily," Adrian said quietly, "this isn't the place." "No, I think it is the place," I interrupted, feeling tears of frustration building. "I think our family should know what kind of man you really are, how controlling and manipulative you can be when you don't get your way." "Honey," my mother said gently, "maybe you should—" "He's been sleeping in the guest room, Mom. He's been treating me like I'm some kind of criminal, all because I dared to have a life outside of this house." I was crying now, and I could see the effect it was having on everyone. My parents looked horrified, Not at Adrian, but at the situation. Sophie had tears in her eyes. Adrian stood up calmly, placed his napkin on the table, and looked at me with an expression of profound sadness. "I think I should go," he said simply. After he left, my father put his arm around me, while my mother fussed over Sophie. The consensus seemed to be that Adrian was going through some kind of midlife crisis, that he was being unreasonable and cruel. "He just doesn't appreciate what he has," Dad said. "Some men get comfortable and forget that they need to keep working at their marriage." But even as my family rallied around me, I felt a growing unease. There had been something in Adrian's eyes when he looked at me, not anger or hurt, but something much worse. Disappointment. That night, I found a business card on my dresser. Thompson & Associates Family Law. Below it, in Adrian's careful handwriting, was a date and time for the following week. A family meeting, he'd called it when I asked. But the location made it clear this was something much more serious. The week leading up to the family meeting was torture. Adrian maintained his polite distance, but there was something different about him now. He moved through our daily routines with the efficiency of someone following a checklist. He made Sophie's lunch, helped with homework, did his share of household chores, but it all felt mechanical, like he was going through the motions while his mind was elsewhere. I tried everything to break through his wall. I cooked his favorite dinner, wore the dress he'd always complimented, even suggested we watch that documentary about artificial intelligence he'd been wanting to see. Nothing worked. He was cordial, even kind, but completely unreachable. The worst part was how it was affecting Sophie. She'd always been sensitive to tension, and the atmosphere in our house was thick with it. I found her crying in her room one night after Adrian had tucked her in. "Mommy, are you and Daddy getting divorced?" she asked, her voice small and scared. My heart broke. "Oh, baby, no. Mommy and Daddy are just having a little disagreement. It happens sometimes with grown-ups. It doesn't mean we don't love you. But Daddy seems so sad all the time." I smoothed her hair back from her face. "Daddy's just dealing with some work stress. Everything's going to be fine, I promise." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. At work, the gossip about my situation had reached fever pitch. Someone had seen the Instagram post from Paris and shared it around the office. The comments from my colleagues were getting more pointed. "So how long were you in Paris with your ex?" asked Mark from the design team, his tone suggesting he knew more than he was letting on. "It wasn't like that," I snapped. "We just happened to run into each other." "Right," he said with a knowing smirk. "Just a coincidence." I complained to Lily about how unfair it all was. "People are acting like I committed adultery or something. It was one photo." "Ignore them," Lily advised. "They're just jealous that you're still attractive enough to turn heads. Most of them are stuck in dead marriages themselves." But Victor, Lily's husband, seemed less supportive when I ran into him at the grocery store. "How are things at home?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "They've been better," I admitted. "Adrian's being really difficult about this whole Paris thing." Victor nodded slowly. "You know, Emily, Adrian's a good guy. Maybe you should consider his perspective on this." I felt stung by the implied criticism. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that marriage is about trust, and when that trust gets shaken, it can be hard to rebuild." I didn't do anything to break his trust, if you say so. But his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The night before the meeting at the lawyer's office, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what Adrian might be planning. Was he really considering divorce? Over a photo? It seemed impossible that our 10-year marriage could end over something so trivial. I decided to make one last attempt to reach him. I knocked on the guest room door around midnight. "Adrian, can we talk?" "It's late, Emily. Please, I can't sleep. I can't stand this distance between us." After a long pause, he opened the door. He was wearing an old t-shirt and pajama pants, and his hair was messed up from lying down. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd married, vulnerable and approachable. "What do you want to talk about?" "Us. this whole mess. I want to fix this, Adrian. I want us to go back to how we were. He leaned against the door frame, studying my face. How were we, Emily? Happy, content, a family. Were we happy, or were we just going through the motions? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, when was the last time you looked at me the way you looked at him in that photo? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. That's not fair. It was just a moment. When was the last time you posted a photo of us together on social media? I couldn't answer that. When was the last time you described me as fun to your friends? Adrian. When was the last time you chose to spend time with me when you had other options? Each question hit like a physical blow. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. Tomorrow's meeting isn't about punishment, Emily. It's about honesty. About finally acknowledging what we both know but have been too afraid to say. He started to close the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong about everything. I hope tomorrow you'll prove that I've been paranoid and foolish, and that our marriage is worth fighting for. But there was something in his voice that suggested he already knew the answer. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Adrian was already up when I came downstairs, dressed in his best suit and looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. Clara's picking up Sophie from school today, he said, without looking at me. She'll stay there overnight. Why overnight? Because I thought it would be better if she wasn't here tonight. The implication sent a chill down my spine. We drove to the lawyer's office in silence. I kept stealing glances at Adrian, looking for some sign of the man I'd married, but his face was a mask of calm determination. Thompson and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise. The waiting room was all glass and steel, intimidating and cold. When we were called back to the conference room, I was surprised to see that we weren't alone. Clara, Adrian's mother, was there, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Derek, Adrian's brother, sat beside her, his expression grim. Even Victor was there, though Lily was notably absent. "What is this?" I asked, feeling suddenly outnumbered. "Please, sit down," said a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Jennifer Thompson. "We have some things to discuss." As I took my seat, I noticed a thick folder on the table in front of Adrian. My stomach dropped. "Before we begin," Ms. Thompson said, "I want to make it clear that this meeting is being recorded, with everyone's consent, and that anything discussed here may be used in future legal proceedings." Legal proceedings? I looked at Adrian in shock. What kind of legal proceedings? He met my eyes for the first time that day. That depends on how honest you're willing to be today. Ms. Thompson opened the folder and spread its contents across the table. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. Printouts of text messages, hotel receipts, bank statements, time-stamped photos, and there, prominently displayed, was a blown-up version of the selfie I'd taken with Mathieu. But it wasn't just the photo from the cafe. There were others, ones I didn't remember taking, or didn't remember looking so intimate. Mathieu's hand on my waist, my head on his shoulder, the two of us walking hand in hand down a Parisian street. "Where did you get these?" I whispered. "Instagram stories have a longer memory than most people realize," Derek said quietly, "especially when they're screenshot by concerned friends." I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me. Clara's eyes were filled with disappointment. Victor looked uncomfortable but determined. Derek's expression was unreadable. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You're all acting like I committed some terrible crime. I had dinner with an old friend. I'm allowed to have friends." "Just dinner?" Adrian asked softly. "Yes, just dinner." Ms. Thompson slid another document across the table. "This is a receipt from the Hotel Ritz Paris. Room 412, checked in March 15th, checked out March 17th. 2 guests. My mouth went dry. That's not what it looks like." "What does it look like, Emily?" Clara asked, her voice trembling with emotion. I felt cornered, desperate. It looks like you've all decided I'm guilty of something and you're determined to prove it. This is ambush, not a family meeting. We're giving you a chance to tell the truth, Adrian said, to explain what really happened in Paris, to help us understand why our marriage fell apart. Our marriage didn't fall apart. You're the one who's been cold and distant. You're the one who stopped trying. You're the one who's been emotionally unavailable for months. The words poured out of me in a rush of anger and frustration. I've been drowning in this marriage, Adrian, drowning in routine and boredom and feeling invisible. When Mathieu looked at me, he saw me, really saw me. He reminded me that I'm more than just a wife and mother. I'm a person with my own needs and desires. The silence that followed was deafening. So something did happen, Clara said quietly. I realized I'd said too much. No, I mean, it wasn't what you think. We just talked. We reminisced about old times. Maybe we kissed goodnight, but it didn't mean anything. Just kissed goodnight, Ms. Thompson consulted her notes. According to the hotel records, Mathieu Lefebvre was registered as your guest for both nights. I felt the walls closing in around me. That's not accurate. He just helped me with my luggage. For 2 nights? I looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally, but found none. Even Victor, who had always been kind to me, was looking at me with something approaching disgust. I want to leave, I said suddenly. This is harassment. This is a setup. I don't have to listen to this. But as I stood to go, Ms. Thompson's voice stopped me cold. Before you go, Emily, there's one more thing you should see. She slid a final document across the table. The header read, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. At the bottom, in Adrian's careful handwriting, was his signature. I stared at the divorce papers in shock, the words blurring together as my eyes filled with tears. This couldn't be happening, not over something so small, so meaningless. Adrian, please, I said, my voice breaking. Don't do this. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I've been asking you to be honest with me for weeks, he replied, his voice steady but tired. Every time I gave you a chance to tell me the truth, you chose to lie instead. I didn't lie. I didn't think the details mattered. The details always matter, Emily. That's what marriage is, caring about the details of each other's lives. Clara reached across the table and touched my hand. Honey, we all want to understand. We want to help you and Adrian work this out. But you have to be honest with us, with yourself. I pulled my hand away, feeling betrayed. Clara had always been on my side before. She'd defended me when Adrian's family made comments about my career ambitions or my parenting style. Now she was looking at me like I was a stranger. What do you want me to say? I asked desperately. That I'm a terrible person? That I'm a cheating wife? Fine. Maybe I made some mistakes in Paris. Maybe I got caught up in feeling attractive and wanted again. Maybe I let things go a little further than they should have. But it doesn't change the fact that Adrian checked out of our marriage long before I ever went to Paris. How did I check out? Adrian asked. You stopped seeing me. You stopped talking to me about anything that mattered. You came home from work, helped Sophie with homework, watched TV, and went to bed. Every day, the same routine. When was the last time you asked me about my dreams? My fears? When was the last time you made me feel like I was more than just the person who managed your household? I was crying openly now, but I didn't care. All the frustration and loneliness I'd been feeling for months was pouring out. I felt invisible in my own marriage, Adrian. Mathieu made me feel seen again. He made me remember who I used to be before I became just Adrian's wife and Sophie's mom. Victor spoke up for the first time. But you are those things, Emily. You chose to be those things when you got married and had a child. That's what commitment means. Easy for you to say, I shot back. Lily doesn't seem to have any problem maintaining her identity in your marriage. Because Lily doesn't go to Paris and sleep with her ex-boyfriend, Victor replied quietly. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. I looked around the table and saw my own guilt reflected in their faces. It wasn't like that, I whispered, but even I could hear how weak it sounded. Ms. Thompson cleared her throat. Perhaps we should take a break. This is clearly emotional for everyone involved. But Adrian shook his head. No, I think we should finish this. Emily, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Paris. This is about a pattern of behavior that's been building for months. He reached into the folder and pulled out more documents. These are screenshots of your social media posts over the past 6 months. Look at them. I reluctantly looked at the papers. There were dozens of posts, photos from girls' nights out, complaints about suburban life, jokes about boring husbands, articles about women rediscovering themselves after marriage. Look at this one, Adrian said, pointing to a post from 2 months ago. You shared an article titled, "Why Women Should Never Settle for Comfortable Marriages," with the comment, "So much truth here." Or this one, where you posted a photo from a work happy hour with the caption, "Finally around people who appreciate my intelligence." Seeing my posts laid out like this, I realized how they must have looked to Adrian, like a slow-motion rejection of our life together. I was just venting, I said weakly. Everyone complains on social media. Do they? Derek asked. Because I've been married for 8 years, and I've never posted anything that made my wife sound like a burden. You don't understand what it's like, I said, feeling defensive again. You're a man. Society doesn't expect you to lose yourself in marriage. No one expected you to lose yourself, Clara said gently, but we did expect you to include Adrian in your journey of self-discovery. I felt cornered and misunderstood. These people were supposed to be my family, but they were all taking Adrian's side without even trying to understand my perspective. I think you've all made up your minds about me, I said, standing up again. This isn't a family meeting, it's a trial. And apparently, I've already been convicted. Sit down, Emily, Adrian said firmly. We're not done. Something in his tone made me comply, though every instinct told me to run. There's something else, he continued, something I discovered yesterday. My blood ran cold. What else could he possibly know? He pulled out his phone and opened what looked like a messaging app. These are WhatsApp messages between you and Mathieu from the past month. Messages you thought you'd deleted. I felt the room spin around me. How did you get those? Cloud backup, Derek said simply. Amazing what people forget about digital footprints. Adrian began reading from his phone. I can't stop thinking about Paris. Neither can I. You were even more beautiful than I remembered. I feel so trapped here, so invisible. You deserve better than that, mon amour. You deserve to be cherished. Each message felt like a nail in my coffin. I remembered writing them late at night, feeling lonely and misunderstood, but hearing them read aloud in this sterile conference room made them sound sordid and cruel. There are dozens of these, Adrian continued. Messages about how unhappy you are in our marriage. Messages about how much you miss him. Messages about possibly visiting him again. Those were just fantasies, I said desperately. I never would have actually. Really? Adrian looked at me with those steady, analytical eyes that had first attracted me to him years ago. Because according to these messages, you were planning another trip to Paris next month. You already requested the time off from work. I had forgotten about that. It was true. I had requested vacation time, telling myself it was just to explore options, to see if what I'd felt with Mathieu was real or just a momentary escape from my problems at home. I wasn't definitely going, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. The plane ticket says otherwise, Ms. Thompson said, sliding another document across the table. Purchased 3 days ago. Seattle to Paris, departing April 15th, returning April 22nd. I stared at the ticket confirmation, my own name printed clearly at the top. I had bought it in a moment of impulse, telling myself I could always cancel if things improved with Adrian. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, judging me, condemning me. But underneath their disappointment, I sensed something else. Pity. I think I understand now, Clara said softly. You've been planning to leave for a while, haven't you? No, I protested. I wasn't planning to leave. I was just confused. I was trying to figure out what I wanted. By having an affair, Victor said bluntly. It wasn't an affair. It was... But I couldn't finish the sentence because I didn't know what to call it. What had happened in Paris? What were these messages to Mathieu? What was this plane ticket? Looking at all the evidence spread out on the table, I began to see my behavior through their eyes. And what I saw horrified me. I saw a woman who had been systematically checking out of her marriage while blaming her husband for their problems. I saw someone who had been building a case against her own life, collecting grievances and resentments, like evidence in a trial. But even as I recognized the truth of what they were showing me, part of me still felt justified. Yes, maybe I had handled things badly. Maybe I had made some poor choices. But the underlying problem remained. I had been unhappy, and Adrian had been oblivious to my unhappiness. I want to save our marriage, I said finally. Whatever mistakes I've made, I want to fix them. I want us to be a family again. Adrian looked at me for a long moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with. I want that too, he said quietly. But I need to know that you want to save our marriage, not just avoid the consequences of ending it. What's the difference? The difference is honesty, Emily. Complete honesty. About Paris, about Mathieu, about what you really want from your life. I felt a moment of hope. Maybe this was salvageable after all. Okay, I said. I'll be completely honest. Good, Adrian said. Then let's start with a simple question. Did you sleep with Mathieu in Paris? The question hung in the air like a sword. I looked around the table at all the faces waiting for my answer. Clara, Derek, Victor, Ms. Thompson, and finally Adrian. In that moment, I had a choice. I could tell the truth and face the consequences, or I could try one more lie, one more deflection, one more attempt to control the narrative. I chose poorly. No, I said. I didn't sleep with him. The disappointment in Adrian's eyes was immediate and absolute. Thank you, he said quietly. That's all I needed to know. He turned to Ms. Thompson. Please proceed with the divorce filing. I'll be seeking full custody of Sophie. Adrian, wait. But he was already standing, already walking toward the door. The meeting is over, Emily. My lawyer will be in touch about the details. As the door closed behind him, I realized I had just lost everything that mattered to me. And the worst part was, I still didn't entirely understand why. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal documents, awkward conversations, and the gradual realization that my life as I knew it was over. Adrian had moved out completely, taking only his clothes and personal items. He left everything else, the furniture, the photos, even his books, as if he wanted no reminders of our life together. Sophie was staying with Clara temporarily, while the lawyers worked out custody arrangements. Every time I saw my daughter, she looked smaller and more confused. The questions she asked broke my heart. When is Daddy coming home? Why can't we all live together anymore? Did I do something wrong? I tried to explain in age-appropriate terms that sometimes grown-ups grow apart, that it wasn't her fault, that both Mommy and Daddy loved her very much. But how do you explain to an 8-year-old that her world is falling apart because her mother made selfish choices? The worst part was the silence from people I'd considered friends. Lily was still supportive, but even she seemed uncomfortable with the details that had emerged. Victor had stopped speaking to me entirely. My work colleagues whispered when I walked by, and I caught them looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. My parents were trying to be supportive, but I could see the strain in their relationship with Adrian's family. The easy friendship between our families, built over 10 years of holidays and birthdays and shared grandparent duties, was cracking under the weight of taking sides. Maybe you should consider counseling, my mother suggested during one of our phone calls. Not couples counseling, individual counseling, to help you understand why you made these choices. The suggestion stung because it implied that I was the problem, that I was the one who needed fixing. But as the days passed, and I sat alone in our empty house, I began to wonder if she was right. I found myself replaying the conference room scene over and over, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong. I kept coming back to that final question. Did you sleep with Mathieu in Paris? The truth was complicated. Yes, Mathieu had stayed in my hotel room. Yes, we had been intimate, but it hadn't felt like betrayal in the moment. It had felt like coming alive again, like remembering who I was before I became consumed by domestic responsibilities. But sitting in that conference room, surrounded by the people I'd hurt with my choices, I couldn't bring myself to admit it. The lie had come automatically, a last-ditch attempt to maintain some shred of dignity. Now I realized that the lie had been worse than the truth. Adrian could have forgiven an affair, maybe. People make mistakes, marriages can be rebuilt, but he couldn't forgive the systematic dishonesty, the months of gaslighting, the refusal to take responsibility for my actions. 2 weeks after the conference room confrontation, I got a call from Ms. Thompson's office. Adrian wanted to meet with me one more time before the divorce proceedings move forward. This time, it would be just the two of us. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where we'd had our first date 12 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Adrian looked different, thinner, more tired, but also somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He was wearing a sweater I'd never seen before, and I wondered if he was already building a new life without me. "How are you doing?" he asked, and his concern seemed genuine. "I've been better," I admitted. "How's Sophie?" "She's struggling. She's been having nightmares, and her teacher says she's been withdrawn at school. We've started her with a child psychologist." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I never wanted her to be hurt by this. "I know," Adrian said gently. "Neither did I." We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee and watching the other customers go about their normal lives. I envied them their ordinary problems, their intact families, their simple happiness. "I've been thinking about what you said in the conference room," Adrian said finally. "About feeling invisible in our marriage, about me checking out emotionally." I looked up hopefully. And I think you were partly right. I did get complacent. I did take you for granted. I stopped making an effort to connect with you, to make you feel valued and appreciated." "Adrian, let me finish. You were right about that, but you were wrong about something else." He leaned forward, his eyes serious. "You said I stopped seeing you, but that's not true. I saw you pulling away from our family months before Paris. I saw you becoming resentful and distant. I saw you building a case against our marriage in your mind. Why didn't you say anything?" "I tried. Remember when I suggested we take a weekend trip together, just the two of us? You said you were too busy with work. Remember when I asked if you wanted to talk about what was bothering you? You said everything was fine." I did remember those moments, and I remembered dismissing his attempts at connection as too little, too late. "I thought if I gave you space to work through whatever you were dealing with, you'd eventually come back to us," Adrian continued. "I thought if I was patient and supportive, you'd remember what we had together." The flight to Paris was nothing like I'd imagined. Instead of feeling liberated and adventurous, I felt hollow and lost. Other passengers traveled with purpose: business trips, family vacations, romantic getaways. I was running from the wreckage of my life, and everyone seemed to sense it. Mathieu met me at Charles de Gaulle Airport with the same charming smile that had started this mess. But something felt different. Without the forbidden thrill of an affair, without the contrast to my stale marriage, he seemed smaller somehow, just a middle-aged man playing the carefree bachelor in a city full of tourists. "Ma chérie," he said, kissing both my cheeks, "you look tired.